Welcome back to another episode of Tim's Antique Trains. Today is the day after I went to a train show in Green Bay, swap meet really, and I picked up a bunch of vintage HO and S gauge items. So let's get into the boxes and bags and see what I found. All right, so one of the places I bought things from gave me 50% off everything that I purchased in HO scale because they were trying to get rid of all their HO. These are sealed in the pack nickel silver track from Atlas, 22-inch radius, and even more rare is this 15-inch radius nickel silver track. I'd like to find enough 15-inch to make a full circle so that if I find enough track of all three sizes, I will be able to have a triple loop around my Christmas tree. Another item that they had at their booth was this HO scale Lionel rotating beacon. This is pretty fascinating because it's a scaled down version of the larger ones with a miniature light bulb and a miniature motor to make it spin. So that will be a cool addition to the HO layout. Usually these are much more common on the larger scales, O and S, but finding an HO, I'm pretty happy about that. Last thing I found at that booth was this roll of grass mat. Now, I usually like to find grass mat, if I can, at these train shows because they sell it for far less than you can buy it new. Now, it appears that this is a partial roll. It looks like there's been some cut off of it, but I'll still be able to use this in my reconstruction of the other end of the flyer layout. Now, the first dealer actually that I stopped at basically gave me a bunch of stuff for free. So although I'm not particularly into collecting sea liners, this one's a dummy unit by HM Tempo. It's actually in good shape and it's got a nice paint job on it. And then next door we have a Canadian National sea liner, but the motor doesn't seem to be connected. I'm not sure how that will work out, but at least it's got a motor in it. Here's a Tyco 040 switch engine. This will be an interesting project because there's, I think the steam chest is missing from it. And I'm not sure if these two pieces actually go together or not. We'll see. Here's a lighted weight labeled Tyco. Pretty interesting about that. This guy had a whole bunch of cabooses. This one appears to be a Tyco, or at least the knockoff of a Tyco. Canadian National caboose, New York Central caboose. Now in this bag is another Tyco caboose in the box. Nice brown box Tyco caboose. Pretty standard Santa Fe caboose, but it's in pretty much perfect shape, so can't go wrong there. Now this is probably the most interesting caboose of this whole bunch. This one, made in Japan, B&O. It is missing an axle, and these wheels are actually an unusual size. I believe they should fit on HO track, but they're wider. The actual surface of the wheel is wider than a standard HO wheel. So that is pretty unusual. Okay, now I'm going to get into the much more interesting stuff. This is where this dealer had a bunch of vintage stuff that he picked up. Someone was going to throw all this away, and he collected it, and I bought it. Okay, we have an HO Scale Super E3 foreground model kit by Ayers Scale Models. I believe these are cardstock, actually. So we have cardstock label sheets, one for hardware and one for a drugstore. Here's a sheet of cardstock and another sheet of cardstock. This one is partially used and this one is completely used. There are a few pieces knocked out. So we have acetate sheets or plastic sheets with windows. And yeah, so there's walls for this one. So the yellow one looks like I'll be able to put it together. Pretty neat for a building kit from the 1950s. There's another kit similar to this, and we'll get to that in a little bit. A lot of the rest of this is parts, but they're very useful to me parts. Here's another flat car. Okay, this is interesting. This is probably, I would say, a Pacific locomotive shell. I'm not sure what this is cast out of. It's extremely heavy. It could be entirely cast out of lead. Inside the whole front of this locomotive is lead weights. It looks like this may have been actually lead poured into it. Not really sure. But that thing probably weighs over a pound by itself. Here's what appear to be the Varney style locomotive trucks. These might be good for an Alco build or something like that. Here's the other one to it. And in this box we have, it's a Roundhouse Models box, but inside is most of a Varney switcher locomotive. This one's got a nice orange and black paint scheme on it, which I believe was factory. It's also got a cab-shaped weight, T-shaped. How about that? And we have, this isn't part of it. This is a frame for another switcher locomotive. We have both power trucks. So this locomotive, the switcher is actually 8-wheel drive. All the pieces would have to be put together for it. And we even have the motor for it, which has magnetically attracted all the screws, which is kind of nice. It keeps them in place. The motor would sit on top of this, and then it would connect to the other truck to drive. I'm sort of looking into the options of 3D printing parts for these vintage kits, and this might be a good opportunity to print a cab for this switcher, as there's no cab. Otherwise, it's a complete locomotive. So we have Pitman motors. This one appears to be new in the box. DC65 12-volt motor. It's the same standard type motor that you'd find on a Varney locomotive from the 50s. This one is interesting though. It's far less common. This is a Pitman conversion motor. It is built for belt drive engines, so it has a super long drive shaft on it. I think that's pretty interesting. Otherwise a standard Varney motor, but it's got a different magnet structure to it, so that's kind of neat. Original in the box. That's not the most interesting motor though. The most interesting one of these motors is this guy here. Check this out. This is, I believe, a 7-pole. This would make it a DC91, I want to say. I'm not 100% sure on that. But this thing is absolutely massive. I mean, look at that. In my hand, it's as big as my hand. This motor is built for O-scale. It would have been 2-rail O-scale back in the 1950s. So that is an absolute beast of a motor. It does need a little bit of repair on the commutator insulator board. That should be easy to reproduce one of these out of some new plastic material, and then it needs a new brush spring. But other than that, I mean, that motor will be a real fun project to put in something. There are more of these in the bag. These are vintage scale light streamline car lighting kits. So what we have in here is mostly parts for a light bulb socket set that you would install into a vintage passenger car kit, which I have several of, and there are 4 of these car kits, so I'll be able to light up my vintage passenger cars with an original style lighting system. But wait, there's more. The vintage fun continues in this Nimco Model Railroad Supplies box. Okay, this is actually really neat. This is an S-scale. It was a kit for a Nimco S-gauge car, but mostly now it contains decal sheets for S-scale rolling stock. So these are decal kits for S gauge. There's a whole bunch of them in here. And then underneath these is some remaining parts for even some vintage paintbrushes. So here's some grab irons for an AC Gilbert something. Here's some plan sheets for the Nimco S-Gauge boxcar kit. This is pretty neat. So this is what you would follow if you were scratch building S-Gauge back in the day, back in the 1950s or whatever. A parts envelope. Pretty sure this is empty. And this is another sheet for the S-Gauge car building kits. This one shows on this end you could use a tin plate trucks if you wanted to run it on American Flyer track, or on this end it shows the mounting of a scale size truck. So that is how you would mount different types of trucks. It would be a lot of fun to build one of these kits. Even if I had to buy all the pieces new from the hobby store today, I can still follow these plans and put something together. Plus I have trucks that would match this pretty well. And we have some remaining building supplies in the bottom of the box. So that is probably the best thing of the whole set. And there's even a horn. I could use this definitely on an American Flyer diesel fix. The last thing I picked up was this box of plastic-filled buildings. Now, the guy said they were mostly for parts, but actually everything in these boxes is essentially complete. On the left, a ranch house, which is missing the front door. Then behind that is the Plasticville Fire Department, which has a chunk out of the roof, otherwise in good shape. A church with a complete steeple and a bell. In the middle is a Plasticville washing, lubrication, gas and oil station. And on the right is a Plasticville house. And last but not least is this American Flyer dual-handled transformer model 9B, capable of 150 watts of power to the tracks. Well, that concludes this unboxing train show haul video. Please be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. And thanks for watching Tim's Antique Trains.